Have you ever walked into a room full of people and realized you were the only one who didn't know the real story? Because that's exactly what happened the night of my daughter's wedding. The reception hall was beautiful. Not just beautiful, extravagant. The kind of place that looks like it belongs in a movie. Crystal chandeliers hanging from a vaulted ceiling. White roses covering every table. A string quartet playing softly in the corner while guests sipped champagne that probably cost more than my first car. And in the middle of all that elegance, stood me. But before we continue. Margaret Lawson. 67 years old. Widow. Mother of the bride. You would think the mother of the bride would be sitting at the front of the room. Right? Close to the newlyweds. Close to family. That's what I thought too. So when I stepped into the reception hall, I naturally started walking toward the front tables. The ones with the name cards printed in gold ink. The ones reserved for family. But before I could reach them, a young waiter stepped into my path. He was polite. Nervous. The kind of nervous you see when someone knows they're about to say something uncomfortable. "Ma'am," he said gently, "your table is over here." He pointed behind him. Toward the back of the room. Now let me ask you something. What would you have done in that moment? Would you have laughed it off? Would you have assumed it was a mistake? Would you have demanded to speak to the wedding planner? Most people probably would. I didn't. Instead, I followed his finger. And that's when I saw it. The table. Small. Round. Tucked against the far wall near the service doors. And seated there already were 3 waiters and a bartender on break. The staff table. For a moment, the room felt very quiet. People had noticed. Guests turned their heads as I walked past them. Some looked confused. Others looked uncomfortable. A few of them whispered. Because even if they didn't know who I was, they knew something was wrong. The mother of the bride was not supposed to be walking toward the staff table. But I kept walking. Slowly. Calmly. I pulled out the chair. And I sat down. No complaint. No scene. No words. Just silence. One of the waitresses leaned toward me a moment later. She was maybe 23. Sweet face. Kind eyes. "Ma'am," she whispered quietly, "I think there might have been a mistake." I smiled at her. "No, dear," I said softly. "I don't think there has." Because the truth was, I already understood something that no one else in that room did. This wasn't an accident. And the strange part? I had already decided I wasn't going to say a word about it. Not yet. Now you might be wondering something. Why would a mother stay silent when she's humiliated at her own daughter's wedding? That's a fair question. But to understand that, you have to understand what led to this moment. You see, I raised my daughter Emily by myself. Her father died when she was 10 years old. A sudden heart attack on a Tuesday afternoon that changed everything about our lives. One day we were a normal family. The next day, it was just the 2 of us. I worked 2 jobs to keep things together. During the day I ran our little bakery. At night I handled bookkeeping for a supply company downtown. Sleep became a luxury. Vacations disappeared. But Emily never went without what she needed. I still remember the year she got accepted into college. Tuition was higher than I expected. So I sold the car her father loved most. The old blue convertible he used to polish every Sunday. Emily cried when she found out. She said, "Mom, you didn't have to do that." But I told her the truth. Yes, I did. Because that's what parents do. We make sacrifices our children may never fully understand. For a long time, Emily understood that. At least, I thought she did. But things started changing a few years ago. New job. New city. New friends. And eventually, Daniel. Daniel Hart. 34 years old. Corporate lawyer. Perfect suits. Perfect smile. The kind of man who always seemed like he stepped out of a magazine advertisement. At first, I was happy for her. He seemed charming. Successful. Ambitious. But when I met his parents, something felt different. Especially his mother. Victoria Hart. 61. Elegant. Expensive jewelry. The kind of woman who could evaluate your entire life with a single glance. During our first dinner together, she asked me a question that sounded innocent. "So Margaret," she said, sipping her wine, "what kind of business did you run?" "A bakery," I replied. Her smile tightened. "Oh." Just that one word. "Oh." Have you ever heard someone say a single syllable that somehow manages to carry an entire judgment inside it? That was the moment I realized something. In Victoria's world, people were divided into categories. And I had already been placed into mine. Still, I told myself something important. This wedding wasn't about Victoria. It wasn't about Daniel. It was about Emily. My daughter. So when Victoria insisted on taking control of the wedding planning, I didn't argue. She said she wanted everything to be perfect. She handled the venue. The decorations. The guest list. Even the seating chart. I never saw the seating chart. Not until tonight. Not until the moment that waiter pointed me to the back of the room. The staff table. Across the hall, I could see Emily standing near the dance floor talking to guests. She hadn't looked toward me yet. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she did. But before I could decide which possibility hurt more, something unexpected happened. The wedding coordinator hurried toward me. A woman named Claire Donovan. Early 40s. Professional. Organized. But right now she looked nervous. Very nervous. She leaned down beside my chair and lowered her voice. "Ma'am," she whispered, "the bride needs to speak with you." I looked up at her. And I asked a quiet question. One simple question. But the moment the words left my mouth, Claire froze. Did she finally find out? Have you ever been in a room where everyone believes they understand what's happening, but they're completely wrong? That's exactly what the reception hall felt like in that moment. Claire Donovan was still kneeling beside me, her expression frozen after hearing my question. Did she finally find out? For a split second, she didn't say anything. Just blinked. You could almost see the confusion racing across her face. Because clearly, that was not the response she expected from a 68-year-old woman sitting calmly at the staff table during her daughter's wedding reception. Finally she whispered, "Find out, what?" I studied her for a moment. Claire looked genuinely lost. Which told me something important. Emily hadn't told the coordinator anything yet. Interesting. Across the room the reception continued like nothing was wrong. Guests laughed. Silverware clinked against china. The band softly played an old jazz standard. But if you looked closely, people were watching. Oh yes. The whispers had already started. A woman at a nearby table leaned toward her husband and murmured something while glancing in my direction. Another guest turned halfway around in his chair. Curiosity spreads quickly at events like weddings. Especially when something doesn't make sense. And let's be honest. The mother of the bride sitting at the staff table? That definitely didn't make sense. Claire straightened slowly. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "Emily just asked me to bring you to the hallway. She said it was important." Important. That word hung in the air. I nodded and pushed my chair back. The waiters sitting with me moved quickly to stand, almost apologetically. One of them spoke up. "Ma'am, if you'd like, we can move you to a different table." I smiled again. "You've been very kind," I told him. But this seat has been educational. He looked confused. Most people would have been. Because what happened next wasn't about embarrassment. It was about observation. You see, when you're seated at the front of a room, you see the event. When you're seated in the back, you see the people. And from the staff table, I had a perfect view of everything. The way Victoria Hart whispered sharply to Daniel while pointing toward me. The way Daniel's father suddenly looked uncomfortable. The way several guests kept glancing back at the entrance of the hall. Almost as if they were waiting for someone. And that detail mattered more than anyone realized. I smoothed my dress and followed Claire across the room. As we walked, the whispers grew louder. Not dramatically loud. Just the quiet murmur of curiosity. Isn't that the bride's mother? Why is she back there? Did something happen? People love mystery. And weddings are the perfect stage for it. Claire guided me toward a hallway beside the ballroom doors. But before we reached it, something caught my eye. At the front family table sat a man I hadn't expected to see tonight. Thomas Reed. 70 years old. My late husband's closest friend. He wasn't just a friend, actually. He had been my husband's business partner years ago. Thomas rarely attended large social events anymore. But tonight he was seated right beside Daniel's father. Leaning close. Talking quietly. Now let me ask you something. Why would a retired 70-year-old man who avoids weddings suddenly appear at this one? And why would he spend the evening whispering with the groom's family? Those questions sat in the back of my mind as Claire opened the hallway door. Emily was standing inside. My daughter. 32 years old. Still wearing the same soft expression she had as a child when she was trying to solve a problem she didn't understand. But tonight her eyes looked troubled. The moment she saw me, she stepped forward. Mom. Her voice was tight. Nervous. For a second neither of us spoke. Have you ever had a conversation where both people already know something is wrong? But neither one wants to say it first? That was this moment. Finally Emily said, "Why didn't you tell anyone?" An interesting question. Because notice what she didn't ask. She didn't ask if I was upset. She didn't ask if I was embarrassed. She asked why I stayed silent. Which meant she had already heard about the seating. I didn't think it was necessary, I replied calmly. Emily ran a hand through her hair. Necessary, she said quietly. Mom, you're sitting with the staff. Yes, I said. I noticed. Claire shifted awkwardly beside us. She clearly wished she wasn't part of this conversation anymore. Emily looked at me again. And now something else appeared in her expression. Confusion. Real confusion. Mom. I didn't approve that seating chart. That sentence hung in the air between us. I studied her face carefully. Because sometimes people lie with their words. But their eyes tell the truth. And right now? Emily looked genuinely surprised. Which meant one thing. She didn't know. So you didn't choose that table for me? I asked gently. Emily shook her head immediately. No. Victoria handled the seating chart. Ah. Victoria. Suddenly the puzzle pieces began to align. But before I could respond, footsteps echoed from the ballroom entrance behind us. I turned. And my breath caught slightly. Because walking through the doors was a man carrying a leather folder. A man I recognized immediately. Nathan Cole. 45 years old. Attorney. Executor. And the one person at this wedding who understood the truth that no one else did. Why would a lawyer arrive at a wedding reception? And more importantly, why would the mother of the bride look relieved when she sees him? That's the question hanging in the hallway the moment Nathan Cole stepped through those doors. Emily hadn't noticed him yet. She was still focused on me, trying to understand why I hadn't caused a scene about the seating. "Mom," she said softly, "I swear I didn't know." Her voice cracked slightly. And for a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be. The one who used to sit on the bakery counter while I iced cupcakes. The one who used to promise me that when she got married one day, she would make sure I sat right beside her. But life changes people. Not always in obvious ways. Sometimes the changes are slow. Subtle. Invisible until moments like this. I placed a hand gently on her arm. "I believe you," I told her. "And I meant it." Emily looked relieved, but the tension in her shoulders didn't disappear. Because something else was bothering her. "You're not angry," she said quietly. Not a question. A realization. Most mothers would be furious. Embarrassed. Humiliated. Yet here I was standing calmly in the hallway like this entire situation was part of a normal evening. "Should I be?" I asked. Emily stared at me. "Yes," she said honestly. "You should." I almost smiled. Because she still didn't understand. And that was about to change. Behind her, Claire suddenly straightened. Her eyes had shifted toward the ballroom entrance. Following her gaze, Emily finally turned. And saw Nathan. He walked with the steady confidence of someone used to serious conversations. Dark suit. Calm expression. Leather folder tucked under his arm. The moment Emily noticed him, confusion crossed her face. "Who is that?" she asked. Nathan stopped a few feet away from us. "Good evening, Margaret," he said politely. I nodded. "Good evening, Nathan." Emily looked between us. "You know him?" "Of course," I said. Nathan extended his hand toward Emily. "Nathan Cole. Attorney." Emily shook his hand automatically. But the confusion on her face deepened. "Attorney for what?" she asked. Nathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he handed me the folder. "Now let me ask you something. If someone handed you a legal folder at your daughter's wedding, what would you assume it contained?" Most people would guess something dramatic. Maybe a contract. Maybe a dispute. But this folder wasn't about drama. It was about truth. And truths, when revealed at the right moment, can change everything. Emily looked at the folder. Then back at me. "Mom, what's going on?" Her voice had shifted. Less confusion now. More unease. I opened the folder slowly. Inside were several documents. Shareholder agreements. Investment records. Company ownership summaries. Nathan spoke quietly. "The final confirmations arrived this afternoon." Emily blinked. "Confirmations of what?" I closed the folder and looked directly at my daughter. "Emily," I said gently, "do you remember when your father and I invested in that technology company years ago?" Her brow furrowed. "You mean the small startup Dad talked about sometimes?" "Yes. That company barely existed back then," she said. "That's true. What does that have to do with tonight?" A fair question. But before I answered, Nathan spoke again. "The company is now valued at approximately $11 billion. Emily stared at him. Silence filled the hallway. Sometimes numbers are so large they don't make sense immediately. 11 billion. It sounded like something from a news headline. Not something connected to a small bakery owner. Emily shook her head slightly. "I don't understand." So I explained. 23 years ago, your father and I met a young software engineer. Brilliant man. No funding. No connections. But he had an idea. An idea everyone else dismissed. Your father believed in him. So we invested. Not much. Just enough to help him start. Most people assumed it was a foolish decision. And honestly? For a long time it looked like they were right. Years passed. The company struggled. Investors dropped out. But we kept our shares. After your father died, I kept them in a trust. I never sold them. Emily was staring at me now. Her mind working quickly. So, the company succeeded? Nathan answered this time. More than succeeded. Emily looked down at the folder again. Then back at me. And suddenly something clicked. Something important. What company? She asked slowly. I watched the realization forming in her eyes. Evercrest Systems, I said quietly. Emily's face went pale. Because Evercrest Systems wasn't just any company. It was the company Daniel worked for. The company that had made his career. The company he bragged about at family dinners. The company he believed would make him partner within 5 years. Emily whispered the next question. Mom. Why is the attorney here? Nathan spoke calmly. Because Margaret Lawson currently holds the controlling investment group shares of Evercrest Systems. Emily's mouth opened slightly. But no words came out. The hallway suddenly felt very quiet. And then she asked the question that changed the night. You mean, you own part of Daniel's company? I looked at her. And answered honestly. No, Emily. I paused. Then said the truth. I don't own part of it. I own most of it. Emily staggered back slightly. Shock does strange things to people. Sometimes they laugh. Sometimes they cry. Emily just stared. Daniel doesn't know this, she whispered. No, Nathan said. But he's about to. Emily looked at the ballroom doors. Hundreds of guests inside. Her new husband somewhere among them. And suddenly the seating chart didn't seem like the biggest issue anymore. What happens now? She asked. I closed the folder. And took a slow breath. That, I said quietly, depends entirely on Daniel. Emily looked confused. Depends on what? I glanced toward the ballroom. Because inside that room, the groom was about to learn something that would turn his entire evening upside down. What would you do if the person you underestimated suddenly held the power to change your entire future? Would you apologize? Would you panic? Or would you pretend nothing happened and hope the moment passes? Because standing there in the reception hall, Daniel Hart had about 10 seconds to decide what kind of man he really was. The music had stopped. No one remembered exactly when. The band members had slowly lowered their instruments, sensing something unusual was unfolding near the family table. Guests were watching now. Not openly staring, at least not most of them. But leaning slightly in their chairs, whispering quietly, trying to understand why the groom looked like someone had just pulled the floor out from under him. Daniel's eyes moved between the document in his hands and my face. He read the first page again. Then the second. His fingers tightened around the paper. And then he asked the only question he could think of. You own Evercrest? Nathan answered calmly. Margaret Lawson holds the controlling investment group shares. Across the table, Victoria Hart let out a short, sharp laugh. Oh please, she said dismissively. This is ridiculous. Her tone carried the same quiet superiority I had heard the first night we met. The same tone that had turned the word bakery into an insult. Victoria stepped forward, looking directly at Nathan. There must be some kind of misunderstanding, she said. Daniel works for Evercrest. We know the board members. Nathan nodded politely. Yes, he said. And Margaret is one of them. The words landed like a stone dropping into water. Ripples spread immediately. A man at the neighboring table whispered something to his wife. Someone else leaned forward to hear better. Victoria's smile disappeared. Her eyes moved slowly toward me. You're serious? I met her gaze calmly. I usually am. The room felt different now. The same elegant reception hall. The same flowers. The same music waiting to start again. But the power dynamic had shifted completely. And everyone could feel it. Daniel finally lowered the document. His face had lost all color. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" he asked quietly. Nathan answered that one. "Because Margaret has always chosen to keep her investment private." That was true. For more than 20 years I had lived a quiet life. Running a bakery. Paying my taxes. Helping neighbors when they needed it. The investment had grown slowly, almost invisibly. Until one day it became something enormous. Something powerful. But power only matters when people know about it. And until tonight, very few people did. Daniel looked at Emily. She looked just as shocked as he did. "I didn't know either," she said softly. The silence stretched again. Finally Daniel turned back to me. And I could see the question forming in his mind. It was the same question Emily had asked earlier. "Are you going to destroy me?" But Daniel didn't say it out loud. Instead he did something unexpected. He stepped forward. And then he spoke loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Mrs. Lawson." He paused. Corrected himself. "Margaret." His voice was steady now. But his eyes revealed something else. Humility. "I owe you an apology." Across the room, someone dropped a fork. Daniel continued. "I didn't know about the seating arrangement until just now," he said. "But I should have noticed. I should have asked where you were sitting." He glanced briefly at his mother. Then back at me. "And even if I didn't know about your investment, you deserved respect simply because you're Emily's mother." The honesty in his voice surprised me. Because apologies are easy when they're forced. But this one felt different. Victoria looked furious. Her lips tightened. "Daniel," she said sharply, "you don't need to." He raised a hand slightly. "Mom." Just one word. But it stopped her. Then Daniel looked back at me. "I can't undo what happened tonight," he said. "But I can tell you the truth." The entire reception hall seemed to lean closer. "I love your daughter," he said. "And if you think I'm not worthy of her, then I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I am." That was the moment I had been waiting for. Not the shock. Not the revelation. The character. You see, power reveals who people really are. But so does humility. I took a slow breath. Then I did something that confused half the room. I smiled. "Daniel," I said calmly, "I didn't come here tonight to ruin your career." Relief flickered across his face. "But I did come here to observe something." "What?" he asked. "The way people treat others when they believe those people have no power." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Because they understood exactly what I meant. I turned slightly and looked toward the back of the room. The staff table. The waiters who had offered to move my seat were still watching from across the hall. They had treated me with kindness long before anyone else realized who I was. Then I looked back at Daniel. "The board vote on Monday will proceed exactly as planned," I said. Daniel nodded slowly. "And my vote?" I continued. "That will depend entirely on the man you prove yourself to be, starting tonight." Daniel took a breath. Then he did something very simple. He walked around the table. Pulled out a chair beside Emily. And looked at me. "Margaret," he said, "would you join us?" Not the staff table. Not the back of the room. The family table. The place I should have been from the beginning. I studied his face. Then I nodded. And as I sat down beside my daughter, the band slowly started playing again. The wedding continued. But something important had changed. Later that evening, one of the waitresses approached me quietly. "Ma'am," she said with a smile, "I'm glad you moved to the front table." I smiled back at her. But I told her the truth. That seat in the back taught me more about this room than the front ever could. And maybe that's the real lesson in stories like this. The way someone treats the person they believe has the least power tells you everything you need to know about who they really are. So let me ask you something. If you had been in my place, would you have made a scene? Or would you have stayed silent and waited for the truth to reveal itself?